This is the most powerful tool in the Microsoft and Azure toolset.
Why should I care about eDiscovery in the first place?
These are the main tools that Microsoft developed for you to go and get that data. If you cannot get that data out of 365, then you're in a world of pain.
If I'm a Sentinel customer and I'm conscious of eDiscovery in my environment, what are some of the tips, tricks you would give folks to make these solutions play nice together?
If you put your hand in the lost and found basket and pull something up, that's pretty much what content search is.
eDiscovery is the most powerful tool within 365. In this podcast, I deep dive into eDiscovery with Purview expert Ryan John Murphy from Microsoft. We cover the ways that it's really and secretly one of Microsoft 365's most powerful tools, but also how with that power comes a lot of responsibility and risk. So we explore how attackers can use it too, and then how to defend against those challenges. So let's get going. So Ryan, why should I care about eDiscovery in the first place?
Well, as more and more data is created inside of Microsoft 365, you're going to need a way to actually get that data out so you can do investigations on it, whether that be litigation, whether that be just be pure content search because you want to find an email due to an internal investigation, or even down to Purview if you want to run a DSAR request, okay? Those tools that Microsoft provide you with your E3 and E5 licenses, or even Purview, which is an additional bolt-on, these are the main tools that Microsoft developed for you to go and get that data. If you cannot get that data out of 365, then you're in a world of pain. Let's take, for example, if there's an investigation and that is a regulatory investigation or an Ofcom investigation, or even an internal investigation inside of your organization, or if you're working for an outside counsel, you're an eDiscovery practitioner, and you're integrating with some of your customers, you're going to need to find a way to actually reason over that data. So we've got content search, which is Microsoft's basic content search, as the name provides. That really gives you the ability to just do a broad search over a mass set of data. You can use the keyword query language, which Microsoft provides you, which is a dedicated language that gives you that data back. Then with your E3 licensing, there is eDiscovery Standard, okay? That again is a litigation tool that gives you the ability to do those investigations. It's not as powerful as eDiscovery Premium, nor does it have the advanced compliance index that eDiscovery Premium has. But eDiscovery Premium is Microsoft's flagship tool for you to get that data, reason over that data, even start to break that data down into what we call data segmentation with something like compliance boundaries. That is the main reason why you need to be looking at and adopting eDiscovery today. Hope that answers your question.
No, that's really good info. And there's a ton that I can just dive into there and pull up. One of the things I think back to when I first started using 365, and we're going back an awful long time now. I want to say it must be approaching 10 years or so now. I've lost all track of time. I think of the early days when I was working with that lower level of licensing, and I would use things like the content search. And so based on what you've said, content search is a very, keep me honest here, it's a simple blunt force tool, and eDiscovery allows me to save more time on top of that and just be more specific.
Yeah, absolutely. So the funny way I like to put content search is if you put your hand in the lost and found basket and pull something up, that's pretty much what content search is. It gives you the ability to find what you want, but it's not going to be as accurate as actually going through that basket and finding anything that you want, that data set itself. So content search it's there, and I see content search used by a lot of Exchange admins. You know, somebody has deleted an email or somebody can't find an email, whatever the case may be. Content search can be given to those Exchange administrators to kind of run away and find that data. It's not powerful enough to do what eDiscovery Standard or ePremium does. Yeah, eDiscovery Standard, you do get the ability to use the keyword query language again. You do get some very minor case management, so you can bring your data sources in and your non-custodial data sources, which we can talk about in just a moment. And what eDiscovery Premium, that actually maps back to what we call the electronic document reference model. And there is many stages of that now. Microsoft eDiscovery Premium maps to 7 of them in the eDiscovery solution, but 2 of them outside of the eDiscovery solution, which is within Purview, data governance being one of them. So that would be your all singing, all dancing tool. Separately to that, you've got Purview that is there specifically for DSARs. I have seen a number of customers over the years basically gravitate towards eDiscovery Standard or eDiscovery Premium to run DSARs, but Microsoft has a dedicated tool for that now, which is Purview. So if you're watching or listening to this and you want to be able to really, really refine those DSARs down to hours, not days of data, then take a look at, because that is specifically built for those data regulations, and it will only surface data around that PII infrastructure, if you like, Rue. Whereas eDiscovery Premium specifically is going to give you a tsunami of data back, and it's going to take you a long, long time to go through that data. But that's the nature of the tool. That's what you want from that tool.
Right. Okay. That helps clarify things for me. So I guess, is it fair to say then that Priva would handle almost that consumer/employee level of data request? You mentioned DSAR, so that's data subject access request or something like that. Is that right? And so is that included with the E5 license? Like I'd get the eDiscovery tools, or do I have to buy this separately?
It is a separate license. Okay. Well, I say it's not a separate license, Rue. I think that kind of muddies the waters a little bit. So I'll choose my wordings correctly here. Then it is a cost per subject right request or data subject right request. So for everyone that you want to execute, you can buy. Some of my customers may run 20 to 25 per month. Some of them may only run one a month. So you could go off to your Microsoft representative and say, I want to buy 100 DSARs, and I'm going to use those 100 DSARs over this 12-month period. Okay? Or some of the bigger customers, they may run 80 to 100 per month. They could just go off and buy 1,000 of them. And you can use them at your will. You know, you don't have to use 1,000 of them within a month. I do think they have a life expectancy of 12, 14 months or something like that, Rue. But, you know, Microsoft being Microsoft, if you've got quite a bundle of them left, they're not just going to, discriminate. Complete them off. They'll allow you to bring some of them over, if you like, into that new annual period. eDiscovery Premium is within your E5. eDiscovery Standard is E3, and so is Content Search.
Right. Excellent. Fantastic. And then one of the questions that comes up quite a lot is, if I'm an E3 customer and I'm looking at that E5 upsell and I'm thinking, well, if I move from E3 to E5, I get a whole bunch of stuff, right? I get the Defender XDR platform, information protection, a whole bunch of Purview things. And as you just mentioned, one of those is the uplist from eDiscovery Standard to eDiscovery Premium. In terms of then the actual tangible benefits, so if I'm paying a reasonable amount of money to get that E5 license, what's the benefit to me from that move from Standard up to Premium?
Well, from my perspective, there's quite a significant bundle of advantages, okay? And I think the main one is the Advanced Compliance Index that you get with eDiscovery Premium, all right? Now, let's touch on that a little bit, because if you're a regulated business, and we're seeing a lot of regulators at the moment, essentially looking at eDiscovery Premium and saying, you must be using this in order to pull back the relevant data, in order to have that email thread in, and the email themes and the document thread in, available to you. So those are the analytics in the background that the eDiscovery Premium tool runs, okay? Those are a couple of the main ones. But for me, I think having the ability to have a full custodian management solution, that therefore means those data sources, which are your custodian data sources, so that's your Teams, Loop, your Mailbox, SharePoint, OneDrive, Yammer, Viva, however you want to reference those are available to you to go and click that data on and to bring that actual Advanced Compliance Index back. Then you have the non-custodial data sources, which is your SharePoint. So a good thing to remember with eDiscovery Premium is, or even any eDiscovery Standard as well, is SharePoint is non-custodial bound. What that means is the fact that the data within inside there isn't actually attached to a user, it's in a repository. Right. So you can essentially say, I want to find Rue's emails and I want to find Rue's Teams chats, but I also want to find where he's been the creator and modifier of a particular document. That will go and reason over SharePoint. Now, the benefit there is you get that Advanced Compliance Index in the background, which essentially brings those modalities together and enables you to break the data sets down so you can actually review them in the review set. All right. eDiscovery Standard, you've got to export that data out for you to reason over it, for you to review it. More often than not, companies won't want that data situated on a eDiscovery practitioners or an eDiscovery investigators, or even at times HR teams laptops. That needs to be on a central repository and need to be managed on that central repository, like an Azure blob storage, if you like. So going through those 7 stages that I presented to you with eDiscovery Premium enables you to a number of things, okay? With a collection to be able to refine that search first and foremost. So you can either use the card builder if you want to, and they are built in an order of frequently used Microsoft preferred, if you like, for you to basically go in and take advantage of those. Or you can use what's called the keyword query language. That's a specific language that Microsoft created. It's also available in SharePoint as well, I think, for you to be able to reason over data in SharePoint and so on and so forth. So that model is coming to eDiscovery. With that said, there is a couple of additional benefits with eDiscovery Premium is where you can pull out, departed users data or shared team channels or guest mailboxes and so on and so forth. So you can really do that end-to-end discovery. Next in line from that, you've actually got the review set. Now, the review set is not available in any of the other eDiscovery solutions or content search. That review set itself enables you to do an inline review of the data. So you get everything in a single pane of glass. You can essentially go to that data and start to reason over that data. What data has it brought back? Okay. Have I used the right KQL query? The majority of the time that I see people struggling with the collection piece because it's not bringing the right data back is they're using the wrong search conditions potentially in KQL. So they might use a contain where it needs an equal. They might be using participants instead of sender and receiver, for example. If you can really find that collection piece, your review set's going to be so much easier to go through. But within that review set, you have the analytics piece. You can run the analytics, and depending on the size of your data set, really, that will go off in the back. That will start to put the threading and themes together on the data that you've brought back, which makes it easier for you as the data reviewer to understand the actual data that you've got. So let's take, for example, if there is a long thread of emails, then you'll be able to see by looking at the actual numerical values on the actual side of the window, if you like, this is 1 of 10. This is 1 of 10 emails. The same goes for Teams chats. Okay, so if there's quite a number of team chats going on, again, you'll be able to see that it has a drop-down box. You'll be able to click on that drop-down box and fully see the actual threaded message as you would do as the user has done. So Microsoft can bring those modalities into a single pane of glass for you to be able to understand and review over. Plus, you also get the ability to create review tags, okay? These are, for me, a critical part of reviewing that data. I will often won't use them. I don't know that they're there, but these can be really, really beneficial. For the main reason for me is I will always say to customers, have a master review set, and that master review set will only be the necessary and accurate data that you want to be able to take to your outside counsel or even pass over to the courts or the regulator or whatever the case may be. It doesn't matter how many actual review sets you are. There is a limitation. I think it's currently 25. I think that's being worked on. But if you can tag the data that you need as confidential, highly confidential, public, relevant, non-relevant, legal, financial, historical, if you can put those categories together and then put that into a master review set, that master review set then is really refined. And before you know it, you've actually really culled that data down quite a lot. So you're not paying for very, very expensive outside counsel. You've really squashed that data down and said, okay, I will cull that data down to some, in my experiences, 92%. That's a huge saving for a business, You offer that data out, the data's accurate, the data's relevant to what you're looking for, and you're not paying an extreme amount of cost in some cases for outside counsel.
Right. So when I get that premium investment, saving money is always good, but I'm paying more for the license, but I'm clawing some of that back in the form of reduced legal fees, reduced time, I guess, in terms of the pure resource overhead that goes into it. And also, it sounds to me, again, keep me honest here, the accuracy is going to be improved because compared to, I loved your example of kind of reaching into the lost and found and pulling out stuff with content search. For example, with Teams chats, I get that full context of what was the conversation rather than just here's a bunch of Teams chats presented in an Outlook mailbox that I have to kind of claw through and join the dots manually. Yeah. So tons of time savings there.
Absolutely. Incredible time savings. I take you back to a couple of projects that I was working on over the last 24 months. Okay. One of them was in the automotive industry. We were engaged with this customer. They were using eDiscovery Premium, but they knew they wasn't maximizing the value of their investment in the E5 license, right? They were spending around 1.5 to 1.7 million euros per year just on litigation investigation cases because of the outside counsel costs. We did a six months initial engagement when we ran an eDiscovery optimization program with them. We were able to show them the maximum value of what eDiscovery Premium gives them, okay? But we also introduced some of the bolt-ons of, labeling, sensitivity labeling, and so on and so forth, proper retention schedules and so on and so forth. But that eDiscovery optimization piece, by the end of that route, that is the customer that we were able to cull the data down to 92%. So you're removing 92% of the noise out of that data set. The ROI on that route was significant to the point where they actually realized the savings that were coming down the line, and they went and employed 2 paralegals to help them out as eDiscovery practitioners internally, you know? And why wouldn't you want to discover the data as close to the source as you possibly can? It makes so much sense. And we as Microsoft, we build everything to work together. So you're never going to get that fidelity between the tool that does the searching and the tool that holds the data. The metadata is cleaner and easier and wider to use. We can add additional metadata onto it if customers need to. I've seen that done in the past. We can increase the auditing with the likes of the audit tools or even Sentinel. We can have advanced logging, monitoring, alerting with Sentinel, and we can come on to that later on if anybody wants to know a little bit more about that. So having that streamline of information, let's say, Brew, in the old days, if you look at network design, you've got like this pipeline of data just going through this consistent back and forth. eDiscovery Premium really just plugs into that and gives you the ability to do that discovery near the data source. And like I say, when you explain this to customers, that light bulb goes on, and in this case of, so I don't have to export all of the data into a third-party tool. And I don't have to then spend days and days and days to sew that information together of the Teams chat. Because let's face it, some of these team chats can be groups that can be hundreds and hundreds of individual messages. eDiscovery Premium will literally, as long as you run that analytics in the background, it will basically bring all that information together, and it will give you the visualization of that modality, that Teams chat, as the user sees it. You don't get that with third-party tools.
I love that story because it really, to me, speaks to the heart of why I'm such a, I don't want to say fanboy, but I lean so heavily towards that E5 stack because of the integration play, right? You see it with Defender XDR in terms of threat protection, and you see it with Purview with regards to communication and compliance. So, for example, I don't want to mudsling names and things like that, but there'll be alternatives to Teams out there, right? There'll be alternatives to OneDrive out there, alternatives to SharePoint out there. But there's no, they're completely siloed and they're on their own, right? So when the organization matures and they have to start being a little bit more considerate towards eDiscovery requests and things like that, the overhead that they're suddenly introducing, because they're having to your point, join all those dots and do everything kind of manually, export it, and then basically figure it out the old-fashioned way. Again, it's just kind of any savings in productivity and efficiency you might have thought you were saving by picking quote-unquote best of breed, you kind of then just go away and lose them when it comes to the operational aspect of your business. And one of the things that comes to mind there with that integration across 365 as a whole and Purview to Purview is, we were talking about this before we started, and that's communication and compliance boundaries, right? Where that also plays into the eDiscovery story. So could you maybe explain why, if I'm doing eDiscovery, why should I have to care about these boundaries as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as I follow on to that as well, there's another data security aspect that I'd like to talk about, which is the guest users and exporting that data out. So let's come on to that next. But compliance boundaries is, for me, one of my favorite pieces of eDiscovery, because you actually get the ability to segment the data. Okay, so what does that mean? It essentially means that if I'm based in EMEA and you're based in North America, I shouldn't be able to search your data. You shouldn't be able to search my data. Now, depending on what industry you're aligned to and what regulatory body you're aligned to, there's going to be at some point a ask for you not to be able to dip into other regions or even other departments in that perspective. What compliance boundary gives you is the ability to leverage source anchors, which are custom attributes that are assigned to mailboxes and users, and they can be Azure AD attributes, like custom attribute 1, mine maybe is EMEA, custom attribute 1 is NAM for you, Rue. For anybody that wanted to have a quick look down on how to do this. There are other ways you can do compliance boundaries as well, but let's stick with the basics of what I see frequently adopted. What that then gives you ability to do is create a roles-based access group in the background, a custom role-based access group in the background. And you can say, you can search anybody and everything in EMEA, but you cannot search anything in NAM. Now, two things of importance there is, I'll be able to see you as a data source route, but if I was to add you in the case, I'd be able to do that. But the actual search compliance boundary wouldn't search any of your data. Okay. Right. It would literally bring back that review and completely miss you out. Okay. That's good for the perspective of, like I say, financial services, where I've seen this widely adopted, even down into the legal sector as well. But there's also been those data sovereign areas. So like if you're working inside of like Geneva, Monaco, or any of these types of regions, they are always siloed off, regardless of what industry they are. The data sovereignty laws over there really restrict on who can have access to that data outside of that region. If you're working in these types of scenarios, then compliance boundaries is definitely going to give you the ability to segment that data off. The other aspect of it is for compliance boundaries is departmental based. Okay. That therefore means if I'm working in a specific roundtable in a business, and that could be legal, HR, whatever the case may be, I can wrap certain SharePoint sites or certain users into those compliance boundaries so the wider remit of people that are doing those investigations can't search those people. You usually find that with your VIPs in most businesses. They're usually ring-fenced off in that search segmentation pool, if you like to call it that, in that compliance boundary. That therefore means you can crack on and do your eDiscovery investigations, but we're not going to allow you to target the C-level people.
Great. You kind of read my mind with that question, because that's kind of where I was thinking. As soon as you mentioned the ability to segment it based on geography, I'm thinking, okay, well, a lot of customers I work for, it's like we want to treat our VIP users or executives or chair people, we want to give them heightened levels of protection, right? Because one of the things we kind of have to consider is when we take powerful tools, most of 365, but especially things like eDiscovery, in the back of my head, being kind of security architect, I'm thinking, okay, well, if the adversary got their hands on this, how do I limit that blast radius? And it sounds like these boundaries, maybe almost parallel to like administrative units insofar as we can just basically contain that data and say, you know what, if you want to have access to certain users, you have to have a heightened level of access or permission or something like that. Is that fair to say?
I would absolutely say that the theoretical side and the logical output side of that definitely maps back to that visualization that you get from compliance boundaries. It is right there to provide that search.
Gotcha. And one of the things that I've noticed is, I think this is on by default with any 365 tenant, is whenever someone starts an eDiscovery search or a content search, it automatically triggers the audit log to send out an email and say, hey, this has happened, which I think is great for accountability insofar as, well, it may not be so good if a malicious insider just starts using this tool.
Yeah.
But kind of that's maybe the most entry level aspect to the auditing and the response side of eDiscovery. You've mentioned Sentinel earlier, and that's obviously the Microsoft SIEM source solution. If I'm a Sentinel customer and I'm conscious of eDiscovery in my environment, what are some of the tips, tricks, or just general advice you would give folks to make these solutions play nice together?
Yeah, absolutely. And a little bit of a backstory to that, actually, Roo, is the fact that the same customer or customers that I was talking about, that 24-month journey that I took with eDiscovery, one of their main concerns was, this is the most powerful tool in the Microsoft and Azure toolset, right? This will literally give you the ability to search C-level people's emails, team messages, and so on and so forth. How do we provide the relevant audit logging and monitoring and alerting for that, Ryan? Well, the audit log by default from Microsoft actually provides you with quite a lot of information. So when a case was created, what data sources and non-custodian data sources have mapped into it, who the actual investigators are, so that's the admins in your environment, keyword query search, and so on and so forth. So it gives you the ability to actually start to audit those, okay? But I wouldn't say it's a problem. I'd say it's a challenge for most customers, is that when you export that data out, it's in an Excel spreadsheet, okay? So that in itself is going to contain more logs than your eDiscovery admin is going to need to look at.
Yeah.
Because that audit log contains everything to do with your tenant. That in itself could be data overexposure, accidental data overexposure, to the point where you only want that incident responder to look at those eDiscovery logs, all right? Now, with Sentinel, what I did with Sentinel for that particular customer was I looked through the cloud events table, okay? And I could see that I could get the majority, if not more, than what the audit log is actually providing. And the way I did that was simple KQL queries. I just essentially went in there and said, okay, show me where it says case added, case updated, group member added, keyword query search started, query. And I start to put together a couple of KQL queries to pull all of this data out. Now, the benefit of that, Roo, was the fact that once the KQL queries were refined, the custom query language I'm talking about now, not keyword query language for those confusing the two together. And Microsoft, we have lots of acronyms, so just to clarify that. Using that custom query language, I was able to pull out the relevant data with just maybe 5 or 6 lines of query. But the benefit of it was that was then emailed to the relevant people to reason over that data. Also, I started to get a little bit smarter with how we was using those logs. Okay, for example, they only wanted to understand what data sources were added into what cases and what query was ran against those cases. So I could pull that data with Sentinel and plop it into somebody's mailbox. They're not having to go into the audit log. They're not having to reason over the data in an Excel spreadsheet, potentially overexposed data. It's simply one query, create an incident, and that then goes into that user's mailbox. But additionally, Ruth, something that you clicked onto there is, how do you watch the watchers? Okay? How do you ensure that people who are executing that role are doing it within inside of business hours? All right? So we use the privileged access groups as well. So we kind of mapped in to say, Ruth has access to these, but they can only be used between 8 a.m. and 8 on Monday to Friday. You can't be doing this over a weekend. Okay? That was one of their concerns as well. They're a massive global company. They didn't want people jumping on at 4 a.m. in the morning running a search against the CEO. And then, obviously, because they're managing the logs, removing the logs out of the Excel spreadsheet and then carrying on as if things were normal. But one other thing I stepped forward with was a watch list in Sentinel. Okay? So we had a group of people that were our eDiscovery practitioners within that business. Now, if anybody else was added into an eDiscovery case, that watch list would know that that person shouldn't be in that case. They're not an eDiscovery practitioner. This was one of the things that I won't mention. I'll be careful because it went into the media, but there was a certain company that was basically offering permissions out to a specific region. People was doing what they call black box watches, and basically going through the data and then selling the data on the dark web. Okay. And again, this came out of a scenario of that, catching that particular person in this way by using that watch list. Now, you can do one of two things with that watch list. You can either I just want an email to say Ruth Campbell was added into this particular case and Ruth Campbell's not an eDiscovery practitioner. Or you can be even cleverer and you can create an eDiscovery service admin account, okay? And you can say with a PowerShell script, remove everybody out of this case, right? And just add this service account to that case. That service account then can only manage that case. Now, you've got to move away from using the default eDiscovery manager role. And I'll just link into that very quickly because that's an important aspect of this whole scenario here is the eDiscovery manager role that's default from Microsoft can see all of the cases in your environment. It is essentially a one-stop shop. The other issue with that is years ago, when the decrypt permission was injected into that role, I was working at a particular bank and that caused a flood of data overexposure because people were looking at data that was highly classified that they didn't have access to because of the labeling policies, but they now had access to. So I always recommend if you want to get started and it's an emergency, take advantage of that eDiscovery manager role. But if you really want to be unique, create custom roles. Again, going back to my earlier scenario, you can create a role for EMEA. So only your EMEA eDiscovery practitioners have access to the cases there. NAM, legal, financial, departments, anything that you want to do. That is a good concept to take because you're not just giving a one-stop shop to everybody. So if you remove that at the remit and don't allow people to use that, you can then build out those specific watch lists against the EMEA group, against the NAM group, against the legal group, against the financial group. You can easily then see who's being added into what cases, where and when, and whether or not they should be added into that case. You can then use that eDiscovery service account to say, I'm going to use this PowerShell script now to remove everybody out of this case because I've seen something that I now want to do an incident response on. You can then log in with that eDiscovery service account or incident responder account if you want, and then start to investigate who was added into this case, what query was run against these people. And like I say, that literally was born out of a scenario where somebody was doing this and I caught them doing it because of that scenario.
Wow, right. There's
a lot more.
Yeah, there's a lot. No, I really love it. I love it. I love how you're tying together all these different parts of the identity. You're kind of looking there as the identity pane as almost like your starting point, your first line of defense for the data security in the background, right? We think of Purview as the data security solution from Microsoft, but really it just ties into part of Entra and then I guess Sentinel as a kind of response to it. And so as you're kind of talking there, that really to me just rings home one of the things you said, which was that eDiscovery is the most powerful tool within 365. And that really just highlights it because, sounds to me like by default, this eDiscovery manager, well, they've kind of got God mode, right? Insofar as they can touch whatever they want, including stuff that's protected by sensitivity labels. And so, geez, I guess if I'm an organization of any size and maturity and I'm thinking about eDiscovery, this isn't just a point and shoot tool, is it? I need to really think about the architecture and the data security behind this, all the way down to the identity level before I really just can weaponize it. Is that kind of a fair assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that brings us on to another point quite nicely, is the fact that when you're exporting this data and giving it to outside counsel, there was a scenario last year before I jumped over it to Microsoft, where customers' litigation company that they was using for the outside counsel, they had an account popped. Somebody obviously broke into that account. Now, this particular person that they was able to gain access to had access to a number of eDiscovery cases in a different environment. So that was the customer's environment. And because they'd essentially give them access into that case via the guest reviewers solution that's available in eDiscovery, they didn't know. So and the only reason why this came out is because of those Sentinel queries was showing that somebody in a specific region was logging on at 3-4 in the morning, looking at all this data that's in this case from their customer's environment, and it was like, oh, there's a data security risk here and an identity risk here. So one of the other aspects that we did is we sat down and we said to them, okay, would it not be advisable? What I said was, would it not be advisable for you to really just give them an account from your environment? Then they're following your identity and access management policies. They're following your, conditional access policies. They're following your whole data security, because you as a company, you can either do a vendor assessment on these outside counsels to ensure that they're sticking to your data security and identity and access management policies and procedures. Because for about 6 weeks, this particular person who had popped this account, he was dipping into all different eDiscovery cases because they're in and out of that outside counsel. And they said, how do we do that, Ryan? How do we create an account, just give it a prefix of an extension so it's outside counsel? They have to follow your tenant security policies then. They have to go in with what you've got. You can manage that account then. If you feel that account is under a threat in any way, shape or form, you can shut the account down. You've got full management of that account. You can map that account then into your KQL queries to say, if this user attempts to go to somewhere else or another case or has exported data out. The other flip side of that route is, of course, the majority of times, if you turn around to an eDiscovery practitioner and say, what happened with the data for this particular case that you was working on 2 years ago? Oh, it was with the outside counsel. A lot of that data sits cold in some of these repositories for years and years and years. If they was ever attacked, that attack vector would show up terabytes of sensitive data for an organization, terabytes and terabytes of data. But if you're creating that account internally and giving that guest account to the outside counsel, which an account you can manage, that data don't have to leave your environment. You can literally throw that data route onto Azure Secure Blob Storage. And one of the good things with eDiscovery is the fact that it gives you the ability to create that Azure Secure Blob Storage in the background. You use that token and that URL and say, I want to be able to put that data on this particular repository. Okay, that can be a central repository to your tenant. Going back to my compliance boundaries chat earlier on, is you can have them per region. You can say, well, I need 5 in NAM, I need 5 in EMEA, I need 5 in APAC. That again stops that data overexposure or data spillage into different regions. Hope that answers your question.
It completely answers my question, and it really helps me know that I'm kind of on the right track. I'm sitting here nodding like a madman, just nodding profusely at everything you're saying, because literally yesterday I was talking to some of the sales and marketing folks at Threatscape, and I'm explaining the considerations behind Purview and sensitivity labels and all the rest of it. And I gave the example where, personally, if you or I, we're going through the process of maybe buying a house or something like that, I am sending tons and tons of sensitive data, passports, bank statements to my lawyers, right? And I might trust my lawyer with the best intentions in the world, but what happens if they get popped? And all of a sudden, all my sensitive data is sitting on their devices, for all I know, in plain text. And they might tell me they encrypt it, but how do I know their standards meet my standards of security? Yeah. And so I guess what I'm really learning here is that with eDiscovery Premium, that data, and you tie it into the management, maybe slap some Azure Virtual Desktop and things in there as well. But certainly with eDiscovery Premium, there's a far less reduced need for that data to leave my environment and sit in some unmanaged environment that I don't really have full visibility into the supply chain security of. Am I on the right track here?
100%. And like, why would you ever want to lose control of your data? Specifically when it comes down to investigation, right? Because what you're going to be searching for at that point in time is going to be so sensitive to the individuals and so sensitive to your organization, regardless of the topical matter in the background of why this investigation has come to light. Okay, the data that is situated in that data set is very confidential at times, to the point where this is, just to go off on a tangent, this is probably one of the reasons why I don't like default labeling in sensitivity labels, is because the majority of the time, people do not use their consciousness because they don't understand the data and the label, and they never change that label. So in the background, you have tons and tons of information labeled with the default label, which is generally the most least privileged label in your environment. That is then being situated into eDiscovery cases, and it's completely labeled wrong. So if you go back to my earlier scenario where you remove that RMS decrypt out of the permissions because you don't want people to be able to reason over confidential and highly confidential data, if that is sat in one pool of data with the wrong label on and that gets into the wrong hands, they've got a free-for-all. They literally have a free-for-all on that data. You would always, in my perspective, want to have full control over that data. And that data nowadays, with the power of eDiscovery Premium, Azure Secure Blob Storage, and even the Sentinel piece, which you can touch on in just a second, that data never has to leave your environment. You can stay full in control of it. With Sentinel as an additional piece for that particular customer, Rui, what we did is once those disks were spun up for Azure Secure Blob Storage, again, we was able to put a query together and say, who's accessing these disks? When was they created? When was they last accessed? That again gives you the ability to manage that cold data. If it's hot data, you know that case is ongoing. Some of these cases can be in your environment for 4, 6, 8, 10 years. You know, literally legal cases can go on for that long. But if you say that a case or a disk and even a case that's assigned to that disk hasn't been looked at for 2 years, okay, what's happening with this case? Oh, case was closed 6 months ago. Why has it not been shut down properly? Why has the disk not been removed properly? So it literally gives you that advanced logging, monitoring, alerting with Sentinel, but the advanced capabilities of eDiscovery Premium, for me, far outweighs anybody moving to a third-party product and having all of the conditions and challenges that we just spoke about on a third-party platform, which you're paying storage for because most of it's in the cloud storage anyway, just sat there for years and years and years. Can you imagine the costs of customers now today that could walk away from here and say, I could probably save a couple of $100,000 here over the next 6 months by getting rid of all that cold data and all those stale cases we haven't looked at for 6 months?
Yep. No, I love it. It just, throughout the course of this conversation, it's just become so apparent to me, all the different tools that we have and we now need to implement to manage the full life cycle of it. Because I'm thinking in the back of my head, I'm like, how many folks they'll use eDiscovery or any other tool for that matter, they'll get that sensitive data, they'll do what they have to do, and then just say, okay, job done. And then there's no follow-up to say, okay, well, that data that you accessed and stored somewhere, are you making sure that there's ongoing auditing of it so that if 2 years down the line, the right people are accessing it? And then how do you know eventually to clear up that data? So that's a really valuable lesson there. And I'll tell you what, one of the things that is also becoming really apparent to me as we go through this podcast and we start to wrap up is, I don't want to say the complexity of eDiscovery, but just the sheer level of thought that has to go into the design. And it sounds like there's a lot of little intricacies and things that we need to consider to have a mature eDiscovery environment. Before we kicked off the recording, we were talking about how it's almost an underappreciated tool and there's not a lot of wisdom out there. One of the things that you're now working on to kind of help share that is you're working on a book, right? And that's eDiscovery in Depth, which you're working on with Pact Publishing. Could you maybe talk me through, why go through the suffering? As someone who's written a book, why go through the suffering of publishing a book about eDiscovery, and what can folks expect to benefit from that book?
So my main reason, Rui, was, and I think it comes out today in this chat, is I'm super passionate about all things Purview. That's why I have, the book in play and my own personal stuff, being a former MVP, blogs, podcasts, and all the rest of it. One of my main journeys has been eDiscovery Premium. Okay. And it surprises me still today that a lot of customers will be using eDiscovery Standard because they see 2 tabs at the top of the page and they just think, this is an easy win for me. It's actually not. It's actually probably worse off you using that particular tool if you have the E5 licensing. And let's face it, if you're paying for that E5 licensing, why would you not maximize the value in your license? You want to string out as much as you can on that licensing model. When I was talking to customers, some of them didn't even know eDiscovery Premium existed. They just thought it was just this super complex tool in other remits. Having done all the work that I've done from end to end with eDiscovery Premium, when I was talking to customers, it was clear to me that they didn't understand the solution. And I literally went to town on this route. I spent most of my free time over a 2-year period learning everything I possibly could about eDiscovery Premium, even down to the point, spinning up Sentinel just to see what additional logs I can get through, what additional information that I can get through. So for me, writing the book, it was essentially me sharing my passion, number one, but the most important one was sharing the actual tool's capability. When I was talking to this automotive company and a couple of other customers and their feedback on how the tool works now that they understand the tool, the time that they're saving, the cost that they're saving, even down to that automotive company and the ROI, going off getting 2 paralegals and being able to cool the data down to 92%, on average, it's probably around 75, 80% for most customers. That's a huge, huge advantage and a huge cost saving for somebody. They can look at eDiscovery Premium and think, and that's a big upfront cost. But I tell you now, you walk away from this podcast today, you go and look at the cost of your outside counsel today and tell me that you're not going to save money over the next 12 months to the point where you can do exactly the same as what the automotive company did and bring in your own paralegal, bring in your own outside counsel into our inside counsel. I just wanted to get everything that I love about eDiscovery into that book so everybody else can see the maximizing value that eDiscovery Premium gives to you and your organization. Yes, it's been a very hard journey to write this book. There's a lot of information in there. At times, I'm tired at 10, 11 o'clock at night trying to write this thing. And in the morning, I come back and look at the last few paragraphs that I've written. I'm like, what does that even mean? And I had to go and rewrite it again. But I just want people to know that this is a tool that you can adopt today and get such value out of it. And if you've got Sentinel in the background, which most customers do who are regulated because they want to be able to pull that data out and reason over that data in other ways than the audit log gives them, right? Get it plugged in. There is so much you can do. Watch the watchers with eDiscovery Premium. As we've said many times on this podcast, it is the most powerful tool in your Microsoft 365 solutions catalog. Make sure you're using it properly, but make sure you have that emphasis on data security with it.
Love it. Ryan, you are my type of person because your passion is just so obvious. And this sounds like, it just sounds so kind of cliched and this era we live in where everyone's trying to, hustle and bustle and all that kind of stuff. But I love just the exposure to a tool and then just being like, my God, I now need to obsess over this and really become a master in it. That's just so useful. And then going on to share it through a book. It's such a good story. Listen, we're going to wrap up now. Before we head off, any parting words of wisdom for folks that have listened to this, maybe not used eDiscovery? What should be some immediate things they need to start doing?
Well, if you're stuck with anything in eDiscovery, you can find me on Twitter at RyanJohnMurphy4. I'm sure we will share some of my socials on here. And of course, you can go and pre-order the book. It is, from what I think is a literal Bible of eDiscovery from Microsoft perspective. There's other remits in there as well around eDiscovery outside of Microsoft and how it came together. So if you're brand new to the topic and your company or the legal services company that you work with has customers that have him, or you're just an IT admin and want to know more about eDiscovery, or you're a Sentinel geek like me and you want to know a little bit more, you can emphasize those advanced logging and alerting pieces, go and buy the book. Give me a shout. But what you should be doing right now today, if you have an E5 license, go and spin up a tenant, okay? Go and spin up a tenant and start playing with eDiscovery Premium. I guarantee you, if you're running DSARs in there, go to Preview and make your life a lot easier. If you're running investigations internally or litigations internally, go play around with eDiscovery Premium. I guarantee you, you'll have an easier life moving forward.
Good stuff. Quality of life improvements. And so with that, we're going to wrap up. Ryan, it's been an absolute pleasure. You're one of my favorite people, so thank you for joining us on the show. And I guess got to get the plug-in, obey the algorithm, like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff, and we'll share Ryan's contact details in the show notes. Ryan, thank you very much.
Thanks, Roy. It's been a pleasure. Cheers, buddy.
Cheers.